In the early hours of January 27, 2024, a UPS Boeing 767 cargo plane plummeted from the sky, crashing just 3 miles short of Boston Logan International Airport's runway. The impact was devastating. The aircraft disintegrated upon contact, scattering debris across an industrial area and claiming the lives of both pilots on board. What initially appeared to be a tragic weather-related accident has now become the center of one of the most shocking aviation investigations in recent history. For months, aviation experts and the general public accepted the narrative that Flight UPS 2976 was simply a victim of severe weather conditions, icing, wind shear, and poor visibility. A sad but explainable tragedy. That story has now been shattered by a bombshell preliminary report just released by the National Transportation Safety Board. What they've uncovered isn't just alarming, it's potentially criminal. The aircraft suffered catastrophic hydraulic system failure due to component fatigue that should have been detected during routine maintenance, states the report's executive summary. But there's nothing routine about what investigators discovered next. The failure wasn't just a random mechanical breakdown, it was the result of a deliberate pattern of ignored warnings, skipped inspections, and corporate pressure to keep planes flying at all costs. The doomed flight's black box recordings reveal the final terrifying moments as Captain Michael Reeves and First Officer Sarah Jenkins battled desperately with unresponsive controls. "What's happening with the hydraulics?" Jenkins can be heard asking just 40 seconds before impact. "Nothing's responding right," Reeves replies, his voice tense but professional even as their situation became increasingly hopeless. These weren't pilots making mistakes. They were experienced aviators fighting against a cascade of mechanical failures that had been building, unaddressed, for months. The NTSB investigation has uncovered internal documents showing that the aircraft had experienced similar control abnormalities on at least 3 previous flights. Each time, maintenance crews performed only superficial checks before clearing the plane to return to service. More disturbing still, they were following company-approved protocols that had been systematically weakened over the previous 2 years. Why would a company like UPS, with its global reputation and massive resources, cut corners on something as critical as aircraft safety? The answer, according to whistleblowers who have come forward following the crash, comes down to a simple, brutal equation. Time equals money. Every hour an aircraft spends in maintenance is an hour it's not generating revenue. In the hyper-competitive world of overnight delivery services, having even one aircraft grounded for extended maintenance can cost millions. The investigation has also revealed that in 2022, UPS successfully lobbied the Federal Aviation Administration to approve a maintenance optimization program that extended the inspection intervals for critical hydraulic components from every 1 500 flight hours to every 2 200 hours. This change was approved despite objections from several FAA safety engineers, whose concerns were overruled by senior administrators with close ties to industry. This wasn't just a UPS problem. The report points to a troubling relationship between Boeing, air carriers, and the FAA, a regulatory capture that has prioritized industry profits over rigorous oversight. Remember the Boeing 737 MAX disasters. Those crashes, which killed 346 people, were also the result of failed regulatory oversight and corporate pressure to keep planes flying despite known problems. What makes the UPS 2976 crash particularly chilling is how easily it could have been prevented. The microfractures in the hydraulic system that ultimately led to catastrophic failure would have been immediately apparent during a proper inspection. But that inspection never happened because the system had been designed to avoid it. If you're watching this video, chances are you've flown commercial airlines before. You've trusted that the complex web of regulations, inspections, and safety protocols was keeping you safe in the skies. The UPS 2976 investigation forces us to question that assumption. How many other aircraft are flying right now with similar maintenance shortcuts? How many other pilots are at the mercy of corporate cost-cutting that has compromised the safety systems they rely on? Subscribe to our channel now as we continue our in-depth investigation into this developing story. examining not just what went wrong with flight UPS 2976, but the systemic failures that allowed it to happen, and whether enough is being done to prevent the next tragedy. To understand how we got here, how a supposedly fail-safe aviation system failed so catastrophically, we need to step back and look at the timeline of events leading up to that fateful January morning. The aircraft involved, a Boeing 767-300F with registration N376 up, had been in service for 15 years, accumulating just over 38 zero flight hours. In the world of cargo aviation, that made it a relatively young aircraft with decades of potential service life remaining. Flight records show that between October 2023 and January 2024, pilots had logged at least 5 separate maintenance reports regarding sluggish control response and unusual pressure fluctuations in the hydraulic system. Each time, maintenance crews performed standard troubleshooting. They checked fluid levels, looked for visible leaks, and ran basic system tests. Finding nothing immediately apparent, they cleared the aircraft for continued service. What they didn't do, what UPS's revised maintenance protocols no longer required them to do, was remove and inspect the hydraulic pumps, valves, and actuators for signs of internal wear or fatigue. Former UPS maintenance engineer Thomas Reynolds, who resigned from the company in 2022 specifically over these policy changes, told NTSB investigators, "We went from a culture of, if in doubt, check it out, to one of, if it's not obviously broken, keep it flying." The FAA's role in this tragedy is equally concerning. In 2019, following the Boeing 737 MAX disasters, Congress passed legislation intended to strengthen FAA oversight and reduce the agency's reliance on manufacturers to certify their own aircraft. Yet by 2022, much of that legislative intent had been undermined by industry lobbying and budget constraints. The FAA, chronically understaffed and facing pressure to avoid disrupting airline operations, approved UPS's request for maintenance interval optimization, despite internal safety assessments that questioned the change. "What we're seeing is a systemic problem," says Dr. Eleanor Barnes, aviation safety expert at MIT. "The FAA has been gradually transformed from a regulatory agency with teeth into a partner of the industry it's supposed to be regulating. When that happens, safety becomes negotiable rather than absolute." The NTSB's preliminary report describes in stark detail what happened when these systemic failures finally culminated in disaster. At 2:12 a.m., as flight UPS 2976 began its final approach to Boston, the primary hydraulic system began to lose pressure. This wasn't immediately catastrophic, as the Boeing 767 has 3 independent hydraulic systems specifically to provide redundancy. But what the investigators discovered was that the secondary and standby systems had also been compromised, not by sudden failure, but by the same pattern of deferred maintenance and unaddressed wear. When Captain Reeves attempted to adjust the aircraft's approach angle at 2:14 a.m., the control surfaces responded slowly and inconsistently. The flight data recorder shows a sequence of increasingly aggressive control inputs as both pilots tried to maintain stable flight. At 2:16 a.m., the hydraulic pressure in all 3 systems dropped below operational minimums. 38 seconds later, the aircraft struck the ground. Perhaps the most damning evidence uncovered by investigators came not from the crash site, but from UPS's own records. Internal company emails from April 2022 show maintenance executives calculating the financial benefits of extending inspection intervals. One email sent by former UPS Maintenance Operations Director James Wilson stated, "Each hydraulic system overhaul costs approximately $240,000 and takes an aircraft out of service for 3 to 4 days. By extending the interval from 1,500 to 200 hours, we project annual savings of $14.6 million across the fleet." Nowhere in that email thread was there any substantive discussion of safety implications. The decision was presented purely as a financial optimization, with the assumption that FAA approval would be forthcoming. And it was. Boeing doesn't escape scrutiny either. The aircraft manufacturer had issued a service bulletin in 2020 recommending enhanced inspections of hydraulic components for this specific model after discovering early wear patterns during routine testing. However, they classified this bulletin as advisory rather than mandatory, a critical distinction that allowed carriers like UPS to treat it as optional. Former Boeing engineer Marcus Chen told NTSB investigators that this classification was a deliberate choice. There was pressure from the commercial team to avoid mandatory service bulletins whenever possible, Chen stated. They were concerned about customer relations and the financial impact of taking planes out of service. The investigation has also revealed troubling similarities to past incidents that should have served as warning signs. In 2017, a different cargo carrier experienced a serious but non-fatal hydraulic failure incident involving the same aircraft model. That event led to recommendations that, if fully implemented, might have prevented the UPS tragedy. But those recommendations were gradually diluted through what the NTSB report calls a process of negotiated compromise between safety ideals and operational realities. As the investigation continues and the full report is prepared, one thing has become crystal clear. This wasn't an unforeseeable accident or an act of God. It was the predictable outcome of a system that had incrementally compromised safety in the name of efficiency and profit. The human cost of these systematic failures extends far beyond the tragic deaths of Captain Reeves and First Officer Jenkins. Both were not just skilled professionals, but beloved family members whose lives were cut short by decisions made in corporate boardrooms years before their final flight. Michael Reeves leaves behind a wife and 3 children, the youngest just starting college. Sarah Jenkins, one of the relatively few female cargo pilots, had recently celebrated her 15th anniversary with her partner. These personal details matter. They remind us that behind every aviation statistic are real human beings whose safety was entrusted to a system that failed them. But the investigation has revealed something even more disturbing. These pilots weren't just victims of the crash. They were also victims of a corporate culture that deliberately kept them in the dark about the true condition of their aircraft. NTSB interviews with other UPS pilots have uncovered a pattern of maintenance concerns being downplayed or dismissed. One pilot, speaking on condition of anonymity, told investigators, "We'd write up issues in the maintenance log and get responses like, 'could not duplicate' or 'within normal parameters.' After a while, you start to doubt your own perceptions." The cockpit voice recorder from Flight 2976 captured this exact dynamic in its final moments. When Jenkins noted the sluggish controls, Reeves can be heard saying, "Yeah, she's been like that the past few flights. Maintenance says it's normal for these older birds." This resigned acceptance of substandard performance reflects how thoroughly normalized the degradation of safety standards had become. Let's take a deeper look at the technical aspects of what went wrong. A Boeing 767 aircraft depends on 3 independent hydraulic systems, primary, secondary, and standby, to operate critical flight controls including ailerons, elevators, and rudders. Each system operates at approximately 3,000 psi, pounds per square inch, and uses specialized hydraulic fluid that must be maintained at precise specifications. What the NTSB discovered was a cascading failure scenario that began months before the crash. Microscopic cracks had developed in the primary system's main pump housing, cracks that would have been immediately visible during a proper inspection. These cracks gradually expanded, allowing tiny amounts of hydraulic fluid to leak internally. This internal leakage wouldn't have been visible during casual walkarounds or basic fluid level checks, but it steadily reduced the system's efficiency. More alarmingly, the investigation found that the aircraft's hydraulic fluid had become contaminated with metal particles, a clear sign of internal component wear. This contamination then circulated throughout all 3 supposedly independent hydraulic systems, causing accelerated wear in the secondary and standby systems as well. It was a ticking time bomb that could have been detected by routine fluid analysis, a test that had been removed from the mandatory inspection checklist during the 2022 optimization. What we're seeing here is a textbook example of how not to manage aviation safety, explains Dr. Robert Chen, former FAA safety inspector, now teaching at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. Hydraulic systems don't fail suddenly without warning. There are always precursors, fluid contamination, pressure fluctuations, response delays. The fact that all these warning signs were either missed or ignored points to a breakdown in the entire safety culture. The FAA's oversight failures are particularly troubling in light of similar issues identified after the Boeing 737 MAX crashes. In 2020, a congressional investigation concluded that the FAA had relinquished its oversight responsibilities to unaccountable Boeing employees. New legislation was passed specifically to address these issues, yet just 2 years later, the agency approved UPS's reduced maintenance program despite internal safety concerns. Former FAA Inspector Janet Williams, who retired in 2023, told NTSB investigators that the agency has been systematically undermined from within. The leadership talks about safety, but the operational reality is that inspectors are overworked, under-resourced, and often pressured to find ways to say yes to industry requests, Williams stated. When we raise objections, we're labeled as obstructionist or not being business-friendly. Internal FAA emails obtained by the NTSB show that the engineer who reviewed UPS's request to extend hydraulic inspection intervals initially recommended denial, citing insufficient data to justify the change. That recommendation was overruled by senior management, who approved the change without requiring additional safeguards or monitoring. The manager who approved the change had previously worked as an executive at another major cargo airline for over a decade before joining the FAA, a revolving door phenomenon that critics say compromises regulatory independence. For those of us who fly regularly, either as passengers or as shipped cargo, these revelations raise profound questions about the safety of the entire aviation system. If maintenance shortcuts and regulatory failures could lead to disaster for a major carrier like UPS, operating expensive Boeing aircraft in the heavily regulated United States, what might be happening with smaller carriers operating in regions with less rigorous oversight? The investigation has sent shockwaves through the cargo aviation industry, with multiple carriers now conducting emergency inspections of their Boeing 767 fleets. FedEx has already grounded 12 aircraft after finding similar hydraulic system issues during inspections prompted by the preliminary NTSB report. Amazon Air has announced a comprehensive fleet-wide safety review of its maintenance procedures. But the most significant impact may be on the regulatory framework itself. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg has ordered a complete review of the FAA's aircraft certification and maintenance oversight processes, with particular attention to how industry requests for regulatory relief are evaluated. What we're seeing in this case suggests a fundamental breakdown in the systems designed to keep our aviation industry safe, Buttigieg stated at a press conference following the report's release. This requires not just procedural changes, but a complete cultural reset in how we approach aviation safety. Tell us in the comments what you think about this case. Has your trust in aviation safety been affected by these revelations? Do you work in the industry and have insights to share? Your perspective matters as we continue to follow this developing story. The investigation into Flight UPS 2976 has unearthed a particularly disturbing revelation. The crash wasn't an isolated incident, but rather the catastrophic culmination of an industry-wide pattern that had been building for years. Through painstaking analysis of maintenance records across multiple carriers, NTSB investigators identified at least 7 other Boeing 767 aircraft that had experienced similar hydraulic system anomalies, all of which were addressed with temporary fixes rather than comprehensive inspections. One case from September 2023 stands out with chilling similarity. A FedEx 767 experienced what the pilot described as mushy controls during approach to Memphis International Airport. The pilot managed to land safely, but logged a detailed maintenance concern. The response? Mechanics replaced a single valve, ran a basic pressure test, and returned the aircraft to service within hours. No fluid analysis was performed. No comprehensive system inspection was conducted. And most critically, no information about this incident was shared with other operators of similar aircraft. What we're seeing is a dangerous breakdown in how safety information is communicated across the industry, explains aviation safety consultant Rebecca Torres. These weren't just UPS problems or FedEx problems. They were Boeing 767 problems that should have triggered fleet-wide alerts and inspections. But the current system isn't designed to connect these dots until after a tragedy occurs. The NTSB investigation meticulously reconstructed the final moments of Flight 2976 through flight data recorder information, revealing exactly how the hydraulic failures manifested during the approach to Boston. At 2:13:42 a.m., the aircraft was on a stable approach at 4,0 feet when the primary hydraulic system pressure began fluctuating. Captain Reeves responded with textbook correctness, switching to the secondary system, while First Officer Jenkins began working through the appropriate checklist. What neither pilot could have known was that the secondary system, while showing normal pressure readings on their instruments, was already compromised by the same contaminants that had damaged the primary system. When Reeves attempted to adjust the aircraft's pitch at 2:15:18 a.m., the response was delayed and then excessive, a classic sign of hydraulic control issues. The flight data shows a series of increasingly urgent corrections as the pilots fought to stabilize the aircraft. At 2:16:07 a.m., just 70 seconds before impact, all three hydraulic systems began showing pressure fluctuations. By 2:16:38, the standby system, the last line of defense, dropped below minimum operational pressure. The cockpit voice recorder captures Jenkins saying, "We're losing everything here," followed by Reeves ordering maximum effort together, as both pilots struggled with increasingly unresponsive controls. The aircraft's descent rate increased rapidly from 700 feet per minute to over 3,000 feet per minute in the final 30 seconds. Their last recorded words, "pull, pull," together, demonstrate that these experienced pilots were fighting to save their aircraft until the very end. But without functioning hydraulics, the Boeing 767, like most modern commercial aircraft, becomes essentially uncontrollable. This technical analysis matters because it directly contradicts early speculation that pilot error or extreme weather might have contributed to the crash. The evidence is unambiguous. This was a mechanical failure that no amount of pilot skill could have overcome, and it was a failure that should never have been allowed to develop. The investigation has now expanded to include a criminal probe by the Department of Justice, focusing on whether UPS and Boeing officials knowingly misrepresented safety information to the FAA. Federal agents have seized documents from both companies, including emails discussing the maintenance interval extensions and the classification of service bulletins. One particularly damning email, sent by a senior UPS maintenance executive in 2022, stated, "We need to be careful how we frame this to the FAA. If we emphasize the cost savings, they'll push back. Let's focus on how our enhanced monitoring will compensate for the extended intervals." This suggests a deliberate strategy to mislead regulators about the true motivation and safety implications of the changes. Boeing executives are facing similar scrutiny over their decision to classify the 2020 Hydraulic System Service Bulletin as advisory rather than mandatory. Internal documents show that engineers initially recommended the stronger classification, but were overruled by commercial managers concerned about the financial impact on customers. One email from a Boeing vice president instructed staff to find a path that addresses the technical concern without requiring immediate fleet action. This pattern of prioritizing commercial interests over safety echoes the findings from the 737 MAX investigation, raising questions about whether Boeing truly implemented the cultural changes promised after those disasters. Former Boeing quality assurance manager Edward Martin, who left the company in 2021, told investigators, "There was a lot of talk about putting safety first after the MAX crashes, but when it came to making tough decisions that might impact the bottom line, the old culture reasserted itself pretty quickly." The investigation has also revealed troubling gaps in how safety information is shared across the aviation industry. When carriers did identify hydraulic issues with their 767 aircraft, these incidents were typically reported to Boeing and the FAA through separate channels, with no mechanism to identify emerging patterns. Each was treated as an isolated event rather than a potential fleet-wide issue. It's like having doctors treating patients with the same symptoms in adjacent hospital rooms, but never talking to each other or recognizing they're dealing with an outbreak, explains Dr. Barnes from MIT. Our aviation safety system has become so fragmented that critical safety signals are getting lost in the noise. As the investigation continues, both UPS and Boeing have implemented emergency measures. UPS has grounded its entire fleet of 767 aircraft for comprehensive hydraulic system inspections, and preliminary reports indicate that approximately 40% have shown signs of the same issues that doomed Flight 2976. Boeing has issued an emergency directive requiring immediate inspections of all 767 hydraulic systems, regardless of maintenance history. The fallout from the UPS 2976 investigation has been swift and far-reaching. Just last week, the FAA announced a complete overhaul of its maintenance oversight program, including mandatory independent inspections for all critical aircraft systems and the elimination of negotiated maintenance intervals. Airlines will no longer be able to propose their own maintenance schedules based on economic considerations. Instead, manufacturers' original specifications will serve as the minimum standard, with any deviations requiring rigorous scientific justification and enhanced monitoring. UPS has replaced its entire senior maintenance management team and created a new executive position, Chief Safety Officer, with direct reporting access to the Board of Directors. The company has also established a confidential reporting system for maintenance concerns, with explicit protections for whistleblowers. "We failed our pilots, our customers, and the public," UPS CEO James Robinson acknowledged in a somber press conference. "The changes we're implementing ensure that such failures will never happen again." Boeing faces perhaps the most severe consequences. The Department of Justice has announced it is reviewing the company's deferred prosecution agreement from the 737 MAX case, with the possibility of criminal charges against executives who were involved in the decision to downgrade safety bulletins. Boeing's stock has plummeted 37% since the NTSB report was released, and airlines worldwide are demanding enhanced transparency about potential safety issues across all Boeing aircraft models. For the families of Captain Reeves and First Officer Jenkins, these corporate and regulatory changes offer little consolation. "Michael trusted the system to keep him safe, and the system betrayed that trust," said Elizabeth Reeves, the captain's widow. "No policy change can bring him back, but if these reforms prevent another family from experiencing our loss, that will at least give his death some meaning." The investigation has also sparked a broader conversation about how we balance efficiency and safety in our transportation systems. For decades, the aviation industry has operated on the principle that safety is the absolute priority, the non-negotiable foundation upon which all other considerations rest. But the evidence uncovered in the UPS case suggests that this principle has been gradually eroded, with safety increasingly viewed as just one factor, to be balanced against operational efficiency and cost management. What we're seeing is the predictable result of treating safety as a negotiable commodity, says Dr. Elizabeth Warren, director of the Transportation Safety Institute. When we allow economic pressures to influence safety decisions, we're effectively gambling with people's lives. The UPS crash shows exactly how that gamble can end. The most important outcome of this investigation may be a fundamental reset of the relationship between regulators and industry. The FAA has announced plans to double its inspection workforce over the next 3 years and has implemented strict new rules limiting the revolving door between industry and regulatory positions. Former industry executives will now face a 5-year cooling-off period before they can serve in FAA oversight roles related to their previous employers. Congress has also responded with bipartisan legislation introduced to strengthen whistleblower protections for aviation workers and establish an independent aviation safety review board with the power to conduct unannounced inspections and publish findings without industry approval. "The system of industry self-regulation has failed catastrophically," said Senator Maria Cantwell, chair of the Commerce Committee. "We need to restore true independence to our safety oversight. For those of us who fly, whether as passengers or through the cargo we send and receive, the UPS 2976 investigation offers both disturbing revelations and reasons for cautious optimism. The crash exposed dangerous compromises in our aviation safety system, but it has also prompted meaningful reforms that could make air travel safer for everyone. Perhaps the most powerful legacy of this tragedy will be a renewed understanding that in aviation there can be no shortcuts. Every inspection matters, every maintenance procedure serves a purpose, every safety protocol exists because someone somewhere paid for its necessity with their life. When we allow economic pressures to compromise these safeguards, we dishonor that sacrifice and set the stage for the next preventable disaster. The comprehensive NTSB report, expected to be released next month, will provide even more detailed recommendations for systemic changes. But the essential lessons are already clear. Safety cannot be negotiated away. Regulatory independence is non-negotiable, and the humans who operate and maintain our aviation system must be empowered to prioritize safety above all else. As we conclude our examination of this landmark investigation, let's remember Captain Reeves and First Officer Jenkins not just as victims of a preventable tragedy, but as catalysts for a safer aviation future. Their final moments, fighting desperately to control an aircraft compromised by failures they never knew existed, should serve as a powerful reminder of what's truly at stake in every safety decision. The skies will never be completely without risk, but they can and must be free from the kind of calculated compromises that brought down Flight UPS 2976. That's not just a technical conclusion from an aviation investigation. It's a moral imperative that touches everyone who flies, ships, packages, or depends on the intricate global transportation network that connects our world. Share this video with anyone you know who works in transportation, maintenance, or safety-critical industries. These lessons extend far beyond aviation. They apply anywhere humans trust their lives to complex systems and the people who maintain them. And leave a comment letting us know what aspects of this investigation you'd like us to explore in future videos. The conversation about safety is one that never ends, and that vigilance is exactly what keeps us safe.